going to start out a little non-metaphysically, if that's okay, and say that language itself is a technology and a mechanism for manifestation of reality and for effecting influences on all levels of consciousness and unconsciousness. So a technology involves techniques, methods, process, concepts, understandings, recorded simulacra, shared operational ideas, concepts, ideas, points of reference that we share and operate from. We can say that everybody online could understand what an apple was if they looked at an apple and what an orange was if they looked at an orange. Perhaps not everyone would be able to recognize a tangerine as being different than an orange, or a certain kind of orange, a pygmy orange, so to speak, or pygmy tomatoes, or small tomatoes, or cherry tomatoes being different than a regular full-size tomato, and unless we had some frame of reference for comparison. So in the process of utilizing language as an evolutionary and transformational technology, which is beyond vitally important for us as a species to develop the capacity to do. If we can't affect a transformational language that is supportive of conscious evolution, we could say that Sanskrit is such a language. That said, not everybody knows Sanskrit. And Sanskrit is for many people not necessarily an acceptable language to learn in order to be able to design a social movement engine or design a new technology in the world. Science language, scientification of language is supportive of many technological developments and evolutions of adaptive technological capacity. And still, the language of science is very incomplete. It is a technology. It is a part of the larger technology of communication and of shared evolution via communication, via standard concepts, ideas, thoughts, perspectives, positionalities, recordings, simulacra, etc. So this is a vast conversation. We're just beginning. We're not even close to scratching the surface on it as to its meaning, its implications, its vital importance. If we cannot share consciousness, if we've said 40 weeks back that we're working to develop Gestalt consciousness between us, in part because it is a prerequisite to us developing a shared language of transformation that can be communicated to humanity and that can be standard and can be referenceable and can align and synchronize and orchestrate all of the efforts of humanity to be able to solve our collective issues and to evolve together as a conscious community. We're not talking about making people into meerkats that all look in the same direction at predators whenever they become afraid. That's not the scenario that we're suggesting. We're suggesting everyone being able to understand each other and to work together for peaceful intentions, gentle, loving, kind, caring intentions, not to build a Tower of Babel to seek to take over heaven, or to have the egoic process of humanity try to develop in some way as to not operate in surrendered, unconditional love to God. We're doing our best to evolve a path, a describable, communicable path for all of humanity to reach up to God and to receive the love of God in return, and to operate in conscious harmony and orchestrated dynamics with the process of ever unfolding and infinite process of God, and to solve climate change, and to work together on very practical, real world, grounded dynamics of how do we diminish our carbon footprint? How do we collaborate? how do we cease competing? How do we shift out of glamours? How do we shift out of prior habits of greed and ego and destructive intention? How do we shift out of control and safety dynamics and into conscious, collective, positive, healthy, consistent, effective, efficient, practical action that gets traction and it maintains that traction? This is our challenge. This is our quandary. This is why the conversation is so big. This is why the conversation is so important. This is why everyone's contributions, of soul contributions, are vital. Simultaneously, everyone's contributions of their ego perspective are also important. We're not validating the process of ego. We're suggesting if we cannot meet ego and unconscious dynamics and subconscious dynamics where they are, without judgment and without control intentions and without agenda, and if we don't meet them with unconditional love, how are we going to negotiate and moderate and facilitate humanity to come together in collective, positive, and constructive intention? So conscious languaging is key and core to that process. And that means resolving anything and everything that is not conscious as best we can, and anything and everything that is projective from prior simulacra or belief systems, traditions, cultural orientations, values, priorities, prior agendas, prior dynamics of decision-making and goal attainment. And when we offer that capacity, that technology to humanity, that comprehensive empowerment that functions as sort of like a tool that cannot be misused, a hammer that cannot be used as a weapon, a tool that can only be utilized constructively and for healthy intentions and purposes. If we offer that to humanity, then the taproot will dissolve, tribe will dissolve, culture in its destructive or competitive dynamics and orientations will dissolve, and love will reign. Love will be the only mode, and it will be a continued love. It will be a continuity of loving life process that embraces and nourishes and honors the natural world. So language as technology, language as mechanism for collective manifestation in the world. If we can't develop a shared language, how do we coordinate our activities? How do we develop a project plan? How do we develop organizations that work together constructively for the common good? How do we time and sequence our processes of decision-making and action-taking and application of resources, technology, and expertise and knowledge and an overall capacity of the species? How do we accomplish that if we don't have a common language of change, of transformation, of manifestation, of mitigation, of challenge, of resolution of problems, of healing dynamics at every level of our system, in every dimension of human life process? We remain fragmented, fractured, unevolvable beyond a certain point, simply by limitation of language. We've communicated before about an island folk that had their own language until people from other countries visited that island nation and took some of their children to other nations to get to learn other languages. And when those children came back to speak with their parents, they found that their parents were unable to understand what they were saying, simply because their parents' systems had been semanticized or conditioned to think thoughts only in the way that their language operated from. So they couldn't understand time in the same way that a European or Westernized mind or an Eastern mind could understand time or life process or change dynamics or learning or evolution. Language is our process. It is our current process, part of our current process of evolution of the soul, collectively and individually. All of us think thoughts in a language or languages. And simultaneously, we have other dimensions of our systems that are pre-verbal or that are fully non-verbal. We don't think or feel in those dimensions of our being from words. So we've got non-verbal, pre-verbal, transverbal, meaning transcendent of the verbal, the spiritual knowing or understanding that can't truly be verbalized, the way that cannot be spoken. And then we have the simple verbal and all dimensions of that verbal, meaning every language and every colloquialism and every traditional way of communicating about life experience, every culture's language, every religion's language, every discipline's language, meaning the language of economics, the language of science, the language of sociology, that are utilized in educational regimens. So these discontinuities of understanding are endemic in our world, and they generate a resistance to transformation that is unseen, unspoken, unrealized, unrecognized, or if it is understood, it's not fully understood. And it's not been fully understood enough to recognize the requirement of a shared language of evolution and transformation of the species, of all of life process, and all of consciousness, all dynamics of consciousness and decision making and interpretation and empathizing and interaction in every kind of relationship. So conscious communications and conscious language are a work in progress. We're all evolving. We're all operating in every different dimension of our life at some different point or moment of the spectrum of attained conscious communication. And we haven't, some parts of us may have recognized that, and other parts of us may have no clue that has been occurring. There is a language of empathy, that being able to walk, and it's an energetic language, to be able to walk in another person's emotional shoes, to feel what they feel, to embrace their experience of life so fully that we can feel their suffering comprehensively. We can recognize what life has been like for them. Without that empathy, without that quality of evolved empathy, a second chakra process, compassion is incomplete. Consciousness is incomplete. Our capacity to love unconditionally is incomplete. So we would suggest that conscious languaging will involve empathy. It will involve every dimension of our being optimally, simultaneously. And that's a work in progress. We suggest not judging oneself for what step of the ladder of that process we're on in any given moment. We suggest that it's not driving ourselves and saying, no, I'm not good enough because I don't feel I'm completely conscious in my communications. And we would suggest that it's vitally important to understand that any language, which is a technology and a mechanism of manifestation of reality, meaning somebody envisioned a chair that we're sitting in at some point in the past history of humanity. They carved a chair, or they made one out of a piece of wood or a log or a rock, and then we've evolved it to make nice, comfy chairs. Those are internalized ideas and visualizations and models and recordings and simulacra that we evolve and evolve and evolve across time. And the chairs that we sit in today are incredibly complex devices. They can have shock absorbers. They can have all kinds of adjusting characteristics or elements to them. They can be made of 100 different materials, the cushioning, the wheels, the ball bearings in the wheels, the armrests, The complexification of reality is something that we must be able to manage, not control, not dominate or domineer, manage and facilitate and support and maintain. And we must be able to do that via common language. And that means common language for how we manage climate change dynamics and life processes and decision making that affects climate change or generates climate change or mitigates the detrimental influences of climate change, and that support the healing of the natural world, catalyzing the rebalancing of the natural world and ecosystem and all of the other life forms on the planet. So this process of manifestation in the world, manifesting reality, it has manifested chairs, cars, computers, houses, food production, supply chains, vaccines to viruses, medicine, educational systems, and it has manifested nuclear weapons, nuclear pollution, all other forms of pollution, war and collective tribal destructive dynamics, competition, our current economic system and social systems, our history has been generated as a result of our language and as a result of our social process. So we want it to be understood. It's vital to understand that language can be a cure. It can be a mechanism of healing. It can be a mechanism of consciousness attainment. Simultaneously, it can be a mechanism of wounding and destruction and harm. Our developed, conscious, sovereign, God-aligned, discerning, fully embodied conscious discernment, sovereign discernment, maintained consciousness will be in large part, the determining factor as to whether we apply language consciously to heal, to control, to damage, to destroy, to harm, or to nurture, or to nourish, and to love, and to support, and to facilitate, and to evolve, and to transform, and to define the collective path for humanity and for our natural world in harmony from now and forever into the future, potentially, until we transcend language itself as a set of training wheels for conscious collaboration. It will be the path and process. Therefore, it's a priority. Therefore, it's recognized to be vital. Therefore, it is an understood necessity. Therefore, it is something that we wish to apply time, energy, resources, technology, funding to the generation of a common conscious language. And we recognize that whatever we arrive at, we've started with a glossary, just a few items. We apologize for not having gotten further. It's a matter of time and energy and focus. We want everyone to facilitate the evolution of that collective glossary and refine its quality of consciousness and refine and refine and refine and refine from this day forward.